Hi, I'm John Groders, and welcome to the No Shame Podcast at the intersection of faith and culture. One of the many cultural addictions I face in my life is certainly football. I'm a ridiculous fan. And so I'm quite excited that today on our podcast is a member of football's first family, the grandson of Papa Bear Halas, Patrick McCaskey.
Have no shame, no, we are not afraid, no shame of the gospel of his name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid, no shame.
This is John Groders, and welcome to the No Shame Podcast with a wonderful guest today that I'm super excited about exploring three of my favorite topics that exist: faith, family, and football. And welcome to Mr. Patrick McCaskey, who is a part of what I call a little mom-and-pop family business known as the Chicago Bears. And would you mind telling us about how you fall into the family business of the Chicago Bears?
My grandfather, George Halas, started the Chicago Bears in 1920. He played on the team for 10 years. He coached the team for 40 years. He was the owner of the team for 62 years until he died in 1983 at the age of 88. He left the team to his family. We are trying to extend his legacy. That legacy has two parts: win championships and help other people.
Not many of us, I don't think, are probably still in the business that our grandparents were in. How is it for you that you have had a life and a career involved in essentially the business that your grandfather started? Has that worked out well for you?
Yes, it has. It's a great blessing. I started going to the Bears games when I was 5. My brothers and I sat on an army blanket next to the Bears bench while my grandfather coached. He once said to an official, "No man is completely worthless. You can always serve as a horrible example." I started going to training camps when I was 7. George Blanda taught us how to kick. Bill George taught us how to play linebacker. And Bill Wade taught us how to play quarterback.
Now, I remember George Blanda. That when I was a young man, he was still with the Raiders, still kicking. He lasted a long time in the league.
Yes, he did.
Into his 50s?
A great player, and he's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
We're talking with Mr. Patrick McCaskey of the Chicago Bears organization. And by the way, I want to mention that if you're listening to this podcast and you're interested in booking Mr. McCaskey, that you can contact the Catholic Speakers Organization at catholicspeakers.com. Do you have a favorite from the earlier days? Is there a game that you might remember that you can sort of give us a description of what it was like to watch football when you were a young man?
From 1920 through 1970, the Bears played their home games at Wrigley Field. And that was a great place to watch football, particularly for my brothers and me because we were so close to the field. But the best game of that era was the 1963 championship game against the New York Giants. Bill Wade scored 2 touchdowns on quarterback sneaks, and the Bears won 14-10.
Did you love it? I mean, were you what was it like to your senses and emotions to be that close? I mean, most people can't get that close to a game. You couldn't get closer than you were. What was it like to be a boy and have that kind of access?
It was wonderful, and it was something that we didn't take for granted. We were told to be on our best behavior, and we were.
What kind of man this is your mother's father, right? George was your mother's father?
Yes, that's right.
And what kind of man was he? What kind of relationship did you have with him, and how did he shape you as a human being?
After every game, we waited for him outside the Bears locker room, and regardless of what happened in the game, he said to each of us, "Hi, pal, how about a kiss for Grandpa?" Sometimes I was allowed to accompany my grandfather to the Pink Poodle press room at Wrigley Field, where he met with reporters after the games. Once after a particularly painful loss, he let out a string of profanities, and then he remembered that I was sitting next to him. I was about 10 years old, and he said to the reporters, "Now, fellas, all that was off the record."
Wow. It's a blessing when we have positive influences with our parents, with our grandparents. And it's not everybody's story, is it, Patrick?
No, but my grandfather was also my godfather and my great friend. He was a wonderful mentor and provided accountability and encouragement.
And when you said you sat on the blanket with your brothers, you had a lot of brothers and sisters, is that right?
Yes, my parents have 11 children, 8 boys and 3 girls.
So that takes us back. Now let's jump right to this past year. We're coming off a year where your team, the Bears, had an amazing turnaround, right, from the 2017 season to the 2018 season. What was that like?
It was wonderful. We were 12-4 during the regular season, including 7-1 at home and 5-1 in the division. The first 8 games we were 5-3, and the last 8 games we were 7-1. It was a lot of fun and wonderful to watch.
And the previous year, right, 4-12. So it was a worst to first kind of a turnaround. Is that right?
It wasn't quite that bad. In 2017, it was 5-11.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. There's the Lions fan coming out. I'm sorry. We suffered too. So a fun season for Bears fans. And again, just sticking on football for a minute, but can you tell us how the season ended in case anyone's listening and didn't happen to see the Philadelphia game? It was a tough ending to a great season, wasn't it?
It was. After the game, my mother and I sat in silence for a long time. And finally, she said, "It couldn't have been closer."
Fans of Chicago are, how would you describe them, fairly passionate when it comes to the Bears, right? This is not an afterthought city when it comes to their NFL team.
Bear fans are very loyal and passionate, and we appreciate them very much.
I sit across Lake Michigan from you, and we get a couple of the Chicago sports radio stations. So I'm listening to Bears talk myself, all year long, and so I hear that passion, and it must be a blessing and a curse in some ways to have such an engaged fan base.
Well, I think it's a wonderful blessing. We're supported very well. We're looking forward to the next season.
Well, that's a great transition, Patrick, because in sports, even though they are wonderful in so many ways, every time you finish a year, whether you're the champion or whether you're in last place, there's another season, and it's the next year the team changes, and there's nobody been around the league longer than you to know that there's going to be ups and downs in sports, no matter how well you run an organization or how great of a legacy you have. It's inevitable, right? There's going to be winning seasons and losing seasons.
The football business is an emotional roller coaster. God is constant.
Exactly. And that's what I wanted to transition into is how do you, I don't know even how to phrase the question exactly, but how do you integrate the presence of God in your life, the importance of faith, the constancy of faith with such a volatile business like the sports world?
I've written the 10 Commandments of football. I've written the Beatitudes of football. And I've written If the Apostles Had Played Football. And I've written a Bear's Prayer.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any of those at your fingertips? Do you have the 10 Commandments of football?
I do.
Let's hear them.
The original meeting for what is now the National Football League took place on Friday, September 17th, 1920, at Ralph Hayes Hutmobile Showroom in Canton, Ohio. That's why the Pro Football Hall of Fame is located there. There weren't enough chairs for Hay and Halas and the other founding fathers. So they sat on the fenders and the running boards of the cars. The 10 Commandments of football. 1, football is a wonderful game. There's blocking and tackling and much, much more. Be enthusiastic. 2, weddings, births, and vacations should take place during the off seasons. 3, remember the Hupmobile in the original meeting.
The Hupmobile. Here's to the Hupmobile. We're remembering it right now.
4, all previous games are preparation for the next one. 5, obey the personal conduct policy. 6, work for the good of the league. 7, win championships with sportsmanship. 8, you shall not criticize the officials. 9, you shall not covet other teams' coaches or players. 10, game times are tentative and subject to flexible scheduling.
See, last year we had a game scheduled for Mexico City, for example.
Yes.
And we had to change it. So number 9, that reminds me of a story. Thou shalt not covet other teams, players, or coaches. I came across a story about George Allen, who was, well, maybe you can tell me the story. It was an interesting one. Do you remember that?
He was an assistant coach with the Bears from 1958 through 1965. And he had a contract for the 1966 season with the Bears, and he wanted to become the head coach of the Los Angeles Rams. And my grandfather wanted to hold him to his contract with the Bears for 1966. So once that sanctity of the contract was held in court, then my grandfather let George Allen leave the Bears and go to become the head coach of the Los Angeles Rams.
So he went to the trouble of enforcing the contract through the courts, through the legal system, but then let George do what he wanted to do. Do you know why why was that his choice? Do you know?
He wanted to establish the precedent of honoring contracts.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather was a man of his word.
Where did that come from? Was that a pragmatic decision? Was that based on his faith in God, on the teachings of Proverbs or of Jesus, or let your yes be yes and your no be no? Like where did that come from in his life, and where do you stand on that?
That came from his upbringing. His parents were immigrants from what is now Czechoslovakia, and they settled in the Bohemian neighborhood of Chicago on the near west side. That was what he learned growing up. And he lived it throughout his life, and we're doing that same practice today.
What are the opportunities that we have because of the notoriety and the popularity of our sports teams and leagues and players? What are the opportunities that you feel come from the Lord as relates to sports?
Well, we have Mass and chapel service before every game at the team hotel. We try to get the Pope because we think our games are important. We offer $100 and 2 tickets. Chuck Simpson said he probably doesn't know who to bring.
You've got seats set aside for the Pope at every Bears game?
Well, if he'll be the celebrant of the team Mass.
Oh, he's got to do the job first. That makes sense.
That's right.
That's great. What's it like to have chapel service with a bunch of 300-pound, muscle-bound athletes?
It's very good. We have Mass and chapel service, so if you're Catholic, go to Mass, and if you're Protestant, go to chapel service. So we're respectful of that, and It's usually in the evening before the game the next day. That way it's easier to get a priest because priests are celebrating masses for their parishioners Sunday of game day.
What kind of opportunities do you see that these players have that is beyond the game in order to be influences in their communities? What are some of the things that you see and in your other roles as the Vice President of Special Projects? How do these athletes have a chance to leave a legacy?
My grandfather encouraged the players to prepare for their lives after football. At that time, there wasn't the money to be made in football that there is today. And we try to help players invest their money wisely and prepare for life after football also. And we get the players involved in community projects, outreaches to schools, and helping charities because we think that's all part of the game.
When players go to a school and do a charity event, do an outreach event, who do you think benefits more from that? I mean, the kids who are there, or do the players themselves benefit from that kind of act of service, as you have seen?
Once they get there, they're really happy to be there. And the students appreciate it very much. And the players have credibility when they encourage the students to get an education and live a healthy lifestyle.
You know, for Bears fans, would love to hear conversations with you, Patrick. And if you don't live in the Chicago area, or you're not necessarily a Bears fan, but you're an NFL fan, you're going to know a few of these names. And I just want to ask you kind of like first impressions, a few great names from the past of Bears. So my first one I'll throw out to you is Dick Butkus. What do you think of first?
In 1979, my grandfather published his autobiography, and he had various book signings. Dick Butkus got in line for my grandfather to sign the book that Dick had purchased, and my grandfather signed it to Dick Butkus, the greatest Chicago Bear.
Well, he would know
Yes.
if anyone was qualified to make that distinction. Also a graduate of the University of Illinois, by the way, right? Which was your grandfather's
that's right.
school.
And Chicago High School, like my grandfather.
So he had insider pull to get that title, it seems like. All right, here's one that I'm really anxious to hear. Walter Payton.
Walter Payton was wonderful. He was very elusive on and off the field and well known for playing practical jokes. He would light firecrackers in the middle of the night at training camp.
Oh, really?
And he untied referees' shoelaces during the games.
Walter Payton untied the referee's shoe. Is that a personal foul or something?
No, the officials got a kick out of it. He was the best football player I've ever seen. He blocked, he ran, he caught, he punted, he kicked, he passed, and he tackled if he threw an interception on those occasions when he was called to throw a halfback option pass.
And how many times did he willingly step out of bounds?
None.
None. Where did the name Sweetness come from? Do you know that?
That came from his college football days at Jackson State. His coaches and his teammates said to him, "You have some sweet moves."
Oh, yes he did. Yes he did. Jackson State. All right, here's another name, and I have just been watching this man on the sidelines of a new league rising up to sort of be a support for the NFL. The AAF has played a couple of weeks, and coaching the Memphis Express is a great Bear by the name of Mike Singletary.
If Mike Singletary had been an apostle, the other apostles wouldn't have slept in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was very inspirational and dedicated, and he was one of the best leaders in the history of the Bears.
You're saying he would have kept them awake. They wouldn't have fallen asleep on Jesus on the night before he was betrayed? Yeah, Jesus said, why can't any of you stay awake, even an hour? You're saying Singletary, even if Peter couldn't do it, Singletary could have done it.
Right.
I love it. Singletary had been there. He would have driven away those Roman guards, and Caiaphas would have gotten nowhere. Unbelievable. All right, here's a big name from the same team as Singletary, Richard Dent.
Well, he was the most valuable player in Super Bowl 20, which the Bears won against the New England Patriots 46-10. After the game, he and I were the last two people out of the locker room, and so we missed the team buses back to the team hotel. So he and I got a cab, and he allowed me to pay for it.
Well, I wouldn't argue with him. I mean, I know you played some football. I wouldn't argue with Mr. Dent.
No, I didn't.
Now, that was the most dominating team I've ever seen in my life, and that was the most dominating Super Bowl win. But I want to take you back briefly to 1940, when 2 or 3 weeks before the end of the season, the Bears played in Washington, and they lost a game 7-3. And they had apparently thought a few calls didn't go their way. And after the game, apparently the owner at that time of the Redskins made a few comments to the press about the Bears being whiners and not a second-half team. Apparently your grandfather saw to it to put those quotes all over the locker room before those two teams played again in the championship game only 2 or 3 weeks later. So in the championship game, the rematch of the Redskins' 7-3 victory, 1940. Can you remind me what the final score was that year?
Yes, the Bears won that game 73-0.
You heard right, 73-0. That's got to be the biggest massacre in championship game history. And interestingly, even I read a quote where the officials were asking, well, what were they were not wanting them to kick any more extra points or something?
During the fourth quarter, the official came to my grandfather and said, please don't kick any more extra points because we're running out of footballs. So the Bears were asked to run or pass for the extra points, which we did. We were in compliance.
When the Bears win championships, they win them with gusto, 73-0. All right, here's a name that last season took me and the NFL by storm, Khalil Mack.
It was a great trade.
Yeah.
Ryan Pace, the Bears general manager, did a terrific job in trading for Khalil Mack from the Oakland Raiders, and he really elevated the play of the Bears defense and the whole team. He's very dedicated. He's a very good teammate, and we're grateful to have him on the Bears.
So how about you? Patrick McCaskey of the Chicago Bears is our guest today on the No Shame podcast. You've probably seen more Bears games than anybody on the planet, or at least as many as your mother. How do you handle winning? How do you handle losing? How does it affect your life?
Well, my goal is to watch the games with sportsmanship. And regardless of what happens on the field, I want to behave like a champion in sports and spirit. Let's not analyze. Let's not denigrate. Let's not second guess. Let's not diagnose injuries before we've read the x-rays. Let sportsmanship prevail.
You mentioned that you have a Bears prayer. Do you
Yes,
do you have that handy? Could you recite that for us?
I can. Bear's prayer. Bitterness is spiritual cancer. Forgiveness is spiritual rapture. Weather is a reminder that God is the boss. The Spirit strengthens us even after a loss. Jesus Christ is the man. Salvation is the plan. When we dance God's dance, He gives us another chance. God's work is efficient. His food is sufficient. Here's a part of my prayers. Bear down, Chicago Bears.
Well, that says a lot. That says a lot. Boy, there's a number of things. You mentioned the line about the weather reminding us that God is the boss, right?
Yes, that's very relevant in Illinois.
Yeah, and you play without a dome.
That's right. Yeah, right next to Lake Michigan.
Do you like that way, or would you rather have a roof over your football?
Well, it's easy for me because I get to sit indoors. But without a dome, our playing field is natural grass, and that is safer than AstroTurf.
I've wondered about that. I mean, that's a bit of a tangent, but I certainly enjoy watching games on grass more than I like seeing them on artificial surfaces. Is there any hope that the game moves back to grass in my lifetime?
Oh, I guess there's always hope.
Yeah.
But I think about half of the NFL teams play on natural grass and half play on AstroTurf, approximately.
Well, nothing better than mud stains on the uniform. I'm sure your grandfather would agree. Can you imagine the Curly Lambeau versus George Halas games being played on a plastic surface? I cannot.
No, that never happened.
Sacrilege. That prayer, I want to talk about a couple of other things that you said. Bitterness is spiritual cancer. What do you mean by that?
I think we need to be in a forgiveness mode. Was only one perfect person. We need to forgive others and ourselves after mistakes and sins. And if we don't, it works very much against us. If someone does something wrong against me, if I don't forgive that person, then I really get punished twice. Because bitterness works against me and not the person who did something wrong to me.
I've heard the quote before that bitterness is like drinking poison and hoping it kills the other person.
Yes. I think that was Debbie Reynolds' daughter.
Really? That's a great quote.
Who said that.
So as sports fans, I mean, this might not seem like, such a big thing, but aren't we susceptible to bitterness when somebody on our favorite team does something that we think costs our team the game? Is that something that we can work on even as fans?
Oh, sure. Sure, and we can forgive fans who misbehave. So everyone is a candidate.
Now, I'm going to take a little bit of a turn here because in addition to your work as a board member for the Bears and in addition to your work with the special projects, you're also a writer. And you've written a number of books. And if I've got this right, your latest book is called Pilgrimage. Is that correct?
That was my fifth book.
Okay.
My latest book is called Worthwhile Struggle.
Okay. I'm sorry. So tell me about this latest one because I haven't had a chance to review it, and I just thought I'd ask you cold. Worthwhile Struggle.
It's a collection of essays and poems about sports and faith. And on the dedication page, I have committee work is a worthwhile struggle. Family is a worthwhile struggle. Football is a worthwhile struggle. Love is a worthwhile struggle. Providing respectful comic relief is a worthwhile struggle. Writing books is a worthwhile struggle.
Because none of those things come easy, do they?
No, they don't. Don't, but that's our job.
So we've talked about football. We've talked about faith. There's two more Thanksgiving Day Fs, family and food. I don't think we have to talk about food, although you may be good at that. But let's talk about family. Can you tell me about your family and what's important to you for that worthwhile struggle?
My parents have 11 children, 8 boys and 3 girls. My wife and I have 3 sons, 2 daughters-in-law, 2 granddaughters, and 1 grandson. And we get together as often as we can for Easter and Thanksgiving and Christmas and anniversaries and birthdays. It's very important to spend as much time as we can together.
How are you doing as a grandfather?
Fine.
Yeah?
Yes, I left the swing set up on purpose because I was hoping for grandchildren.
Right, a hint.
I was mocked and scorned. Now that I'm a grandfather, I'm a man of vision.
Yes.
Christopher Columbus, the Wright brothers, Pat McCaskey.
There you go. Christopher Columbus, the Wright brothers, Pat McCaskey. What do they all have in common? Visionaries and
Yes,
probably
that's right.
grandchildren.
Right.
Yes. You get a chance to be a bit of a different role model. You had such a role model as a grandfather. Now you get to be one. How have you approached that job?
Well, my father's father was my confirmation sponsor, and my mother's father was my godfather. So I had 2 great role models as grandfathers, and I try to be like them.
And I hope that my and your grandchildren say the same about us. I really do. It's wonderful having grandchildren, and they're paying attention to us.
No, they are. They watch everything we do.
How old are they? How old are your grandkids?
3, 2, and 1.
Nice. Yeah. Very cool. How do you practice your faith? How do you keep it strong, and how do you exercise your relationship with the Lord?
Well, I go to church and Bible study, and I have daily devotions. A lector, when I have the opportunity, and I write essays and poems about sports and faith. And there are 1,328 chapters in the Bible. If we read 26 chapters a week, we can read the Bible in 51 weeks and have a week off for Christmas break.
But why would you take a week off for the birth of Jesus?
I used that week to write thank you notes for my Christmas present.
Why is it important to stay in the Word of God? You could drift from that. You have a busy life. You have an active life. You would have every reason to be sometimes approach the Lord. But you have just mentioned to me that you're in that Bible daily. Why is that important?
That's a great book. The number 1 bestseller of all time. It's very well written. And about a third of it is in poetic form.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to write poetry, so it's a perfect book for me.
Well, we've heard one. Do you have any other poems at your fingertips that we could hear?
How about If the Apostles Had Played Football?
Okay, well, I know Singletary. Yeah, let's hear this. I can't wait.
If the Apostles had played football, they would have been a great team. Jesus would have been the coach like George Halas. Peter would have been the quarterback like Bill Wade. Andrew was Peter's brother. They would have been used to playing catch in the yard. Let's put Andrew at tight end like Mike Ditka. James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John were known as the Sons of Thunder. They would have been the running backs like Walter Payton and Matt Suey. We don't know much about Philip, Bartholomew, James the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, and Simon the Cananean. So they would have been the linemen, like Jim Covert, Ted Karras, Jay Hilgenberg, Tom Thayer, and Bob Wataska. Thomas and Matthew would have been linebackers like Bill George and Mike Singletary. Matthias, who replaced Judas, would have been the punter like Maury Buford. Paul would have been a writer and a speaker like me. He wrote a lot of letters, even though the Corinthians were the only ones who ever wrote back. Wherever he spoke, there was either a revival or a riot.
So I'm looking at this team. I like the idea that the under known apostles, Philip, Bartholomew, that those are the offensive linemen because nobody knows them. I like the thunder and lightning at running back. I mean, James and John, that's strong right there. Peter and Andrew, Peter would have had to grasp the playbook, and he seems to be confused a lot. So it's possible you'll have to have a backup ready to go for that. Matthias as the punter, is that just because he's a late addition to the team?
Yes.
Yeah, I can see that. And then my favorite, of course, is Jesus, like George Halas. You may get in trouble for that one. I don't know. We'll have to see.
So far, I've been all right.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. What would you, you get a chance to speak. And by the way, I wanted to say if you're listening to our podcast today and you would like to try to get Patrick McCaskey to come and speak, call the Catholic Speakers Organization or look him up at CatholicSpeakers.com. So you do get a chance to do this as a writer and a communicator. So I think this is a common question, but what's your message for Bears fans?
My goal is to keep the Bears in the family until the second coming.
Mm-hmm.
And we are hopeful that the world will not end until the Bears have the most championships.
So you got to chase the Steelers, and now you got to chase the Patriots.
No.
Oh, you're talking championships. I'm sorry. You're chasing the Packers.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, of course, not just Super Bowls.
Right.
Well, what's the score right now?
The Packers have 13 championships. The Bears have 9.
Okay.
This is disconcerting.
Yep.
The Packers are doing very well for an expansion team.
The junior circuit, like the National League. All right, well, what's your message then, as a man of faith? What's your message to Packers fans?
If you know some people who are not Bear fans, don't be discouraged. Some of the greatest Christians started out as atheists. Jesus forgave the good thief. All they have to do is repent.
Okay, there you go, Packer fans. That's Patrick McCaskey of the Chicago Bears reminding you that there's forgiveness following repentance, and there's still hope for you. I'm sure we can get mail on that one. Well, I just appreciate so much you sharing these stories with us and these poems, but mostly I just want to make sure we have a chance to hear your heart, because in some ways I think guys my age would look at you and say, man, that guy has had a charmed life. Have you had a charmed life?
I have. I have it made because George Halas was my grandfather and Jesus died for my sins.
Oh, yeah. If you're listening to the podcast today and you found this interesting maybe you're a football fan or maybe you don't know anything about football, but we've been talking with Patrick McCaskey of the Chicago Bears, a man who sits in the middle of a big, long legacy of family and faith and what has become such a defining part of American culture for the last, more than 50 years, 100 years really, football. And so I just thank you for giving us this front row seat to chat with you at some length today. I really, truly appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was great to be with you.
I look forward to watching a game with you sometime when the Lions come to town, and you can pray for me. Thank you, Patrick McCaskey, for being on the No Shame podcast. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Have a Hall of Fame day.
Amen.
Have no shame, no, we are not afraid, no shame of the gospel of his name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid.